dyes? None. So whoever is in the Middle Ages that forged this didn't use any pigments. Well, how the flip did it get on the cloth? Well, I'm glad you asked. It resembles a burn mark. It's like you took an iron and you scorched your clothes. You get an image of the iron onto your clothes. The image is like burned onto the fibers no more than, I believe it's 3 microns deep. This leads to the predominant theory that is known as the heated image theory. So here's the deal. Someone in the Middle Ages made a statue of bronze or stone, heated it up really hot, like an iron, right? Put this cloth over it to burn it onto the image. But it couldn't be too hot because it would set the cloth on fire. It couldn't be too deep because it would destroy the fabric over time. But it had to touch it in order to produce the image. So this all had to be somehow controlled. You see what I mean? So we put the cloth on the image that's hot, can't leave it there too long, so we have to peel it off and make sure that it's good. You know? Do you get what I'm getting at here? This is an awful lot of work to come up with a forgery. Especially when all you really needed to do was just paint the thing on there and people would believe it. You know how gullible people are. Why go through all of this drama? You know what I'm saying? And who would have thought of this? Would you have thought to burn an image onto a cloth? I wouldn't have. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why burn an image? Yes?
Have scientists tried to replicate the burning process?
Ah, I'm glad you asked, my plant. Everyone knows that this is a medieval forgery, right? Because carbon-14 dating done in the late 1980s said it was made in the 12th century. That's it, that's over, it's over. Stop talking about this forgery from the Middle Ages. Right? So why are we still talking about it? I'll tell you why. Because with all of our scientific equipment today, we cannot replicate how they did it. How this medieval forgery did it. We cannot replicate this Shroud of Turin. We can't.
Chip, I had heard that that material had not deteriorated and it was dated, you know, at the time Christ was born, and it had not deteriorated.
I had not heard that, about that. The cloth is basically unremarkable. It's just a linen weave. It could have come from the Middle East. It could have come from anywhere. It's an unremarkable linen fiber.
But it's from that time, of course.
It could be, yes. That's what the carbon-14 dating was attempting to do. Right. And when they 14 dated it, they dated it to the late Middle Ages, like around the 12th or 13th century. Not much older than that. That's what was so disappointing about the carbon-14 dating. It's like, if they had dated it to 2,000 years ago, then that would have given a lot of credibility to the fact that it was from that time period. But because it only goes to that far, well, it's a medieval hoax and we're done doing any serious testing on this. We're done with it. It's a hoax and forget about it. Yes? Huh? The carbon dating that was allowed by the Vatican was done in the late 1980s, like I believe 1988. And it was sent to 3 different top-notch research laboratories in the world. One was in Australia, one was in the United States, and I believe one was in Canada. to do it independently, and they all came up with the same rough date. And again, news shook the world. This Shroud of Turin is a medieval hoax. Film at 11.
Chip, did you hear about another piece of cloth that was carbon dated and whose blood, the stain of the blood on that piece of cloth matches the blood type on this shroud?
Oh yes, that's the, it's reputed to be the napkin of Veronica, or the, I forget what they call it.
Veil.
The veil.
The veil, it's not, it doesn't refer to like what some she wore. It was like, it's a smaller cloth. It's kept in Spain that has blood stains on it. And the blood does match the shroud. Oh, by the way, did I mention that? I guess I didn't. You know this blood that's all over the shroud? You know, like here, like here, like here. It's human blood, by the way. Human blood. We have such a level of sophistication now in our science that we can take this, run it through laboratory tests, and find out that it's human blood. We even know the type, the blood type of the person it came from. It's AB negative. Now, back to our medieval forgery. Right? It's a medieval forgery, right? So this medieval forger gets human blood from someone and puts it on the shroud, right? Are you kidding me? Who would know in the Middle Ages if there was even blood? It's probably paint. You know what I mean? Who would have thought of that? The fact that it's real human blood on the shroud is a big indicator to me. This is no ordinary forgery. Someone is really thinking of these things. Leslie.
So Veronica's shroud, the one, the face, did they carbon date that, and did the blood match this blood?
The blood type matches the blood that's on the shroud, yes. That much I know. The carbon dating of the shroud, I'm unfamiliar with. I do not know the results. Do you know, Nelia?
Well, I saw on one of you know, like a show on TV or a documentary that it was carbon dated, and it goes way back to the time of Jesus. I may be wrong. I may have, you know, like, but that's the extent of what I know.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Yes.
But doesn't the AB negative blood match all the Eucharistic miracles?
Yes. Every Eucharistic miracle that's gone through any sort of scientific analysis in which they date or analyze the blood has all come back the same type, AB negative. The one at Lanciano, the one in Bolsena, the one in Orvieto, the one in Cassia. All of them have the same blood type. All of them. And it's the same blood type that's on the shroud. So whoever this medieval forger is, he's been busy making Eucharistic miracles of the same kind. We've got someone who's really into the business of making hoaxes. You know what I mean? You see how ridiculous some of this begins to get? When you start pushing it and you just refuse to accept the facts of the matter, you really have to start stretching the imagination. Because I've seen these documentary shows on the History Channel where they debunk the Shroud of Turin, and they do heated image experiments. And what you see is a distorted image that doesn't look anything like the shroud. Nothing like it. And yet, this is what's being passed on as possible explanations for it. There was one other thing I was going to say about the shroud. As you can see, I'm a big fan. I've been researching the shroud since I was a Protestant. I find it extraordinarily fascinating that we cannot replicate this medieval faith. And we keep coming back to it. You know what I mean? It doesn't go away. I mean, it's been almost 2 decades, 3 decades since they've done the testing, and still people still flock to see it. And most skeptics look at that and go, well, that's just the gullibility of people. They don't mind, they don't listen to the fact, they just believe what they want to believe. They have no sense for scientific reality. You know? And my response to that is, excuse me, when you replicate the shroud in a scientific laboratory, then we'll talk. Then we'll talk about looking at scientific facts, all right? Don't talk to me about ignoring scientific facts because you have this faith. That's bull. There are all that is said about the shroud that I mentioned is indisputable. How did it get there? You just go ask them, how did it get there? It's no paint, pigments, powders, or dyes. Someone used real human blood. What conclusion would you draw? Question.
Who found it and where was it found?
The first record of its public display was done in the 13th century by, I want to get it correct, the Duke of Savoy. He lived in Lire, France, and he put it on public display in order to raise money for the church, the local church. And that's the first record that we have of its display. And then from there, it eventually traveled to where it is now, Turin, Italy.
Is that the same shroud that they found in our time?
It's the same shroud, yes. It's the one that you can go to Turin, Italy and see right now. Well, in a box. They only display it every about 20 years.
We didn't like dig it up anywhere. It was already taken and someone kept it.
Yep.
Where was it found?
Lire, France was the first place that has records of what we understand as this shroud and its public display. Now the question is, where did it come from before then?
Yeah.
Stay tuned for that.
I was looking up some other tests that people have done on this. Apparently, some botanists have noticed that there's pollen and flowers
Oh, yes.
on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that many of them have, throughout the years, have done research, and they always come to the conclusion that the flowers on it are typical to Israel, and they bloom during March and April.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There are pollen grains, partially fossilized pollen grains that are all over the shroud. And a lot of the pollen grains can be found in places such as northern Italy, southern France, which is what you would expect because these were the first places that we know of in which the shroud was in public display. But there are also pollen grains on it that come from Turkey. Which indicates that at some time in the shroud's history, it was on public display or exposed to the open air while it was in Turkey, specifically northern and southern Turkey. There are other pollen grains on it of a variety and species of plant life, flowers, that are only native to Palestine or Israel. Which means that the shroud had to have been exposed to the open air during some time in its history in Israel. This is part of the detailed analysis that was been done on the shroud since the late 20th century. The shroud has gone through several high-intensity scientific scrutinies. I remember one back in the 1970s that was done. And this established all that we currently know, that there's no paint, pigment, powders, or dyes on it, that it is a burn mark. They did microscopic analysis of the fibers. They did microscopic work on the burn. They actually looked at the blood that was on the shroud and how it interacted with the linens and so forth. By the way, these patch marks are from a fire in 1572, I believe. While it was in Turin, Italy, the church that it was being kept in, it was kept in a silver reliquary, and the church caught on fire, and the reliquary started to melt, and the melted silver burned through the shroud and burned it. It's a wonder the thing didn't go up into flames. What happened was one of the sisters that was living in the convent rushed in to the burning church, threw water onto the reliquary, and managed to drag it out. If she hadn't have done that, we would have lost the shroud forever. This also was a good way to compare the burn marks around here, along the patches, with the image itself. The image itself resembles the burns that were done on the shroud by the silver. And in fact, you see this? These are water stains from the 1572 fire. It's a watermark. I do want to show, when we get closer to Passion Week, I do want to show a video more about the history and the origin of the shroud, and where did we get, where is most likely, where did it come from, and how do we